welcome to another Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. It's great to be here in a beautiful San Francisco, sunny San Francisco day. Every time we look out these windows, we say, when is we going to get tired of the view? Never, never, ever, ever. Let's see. First off, we want to introduce our Commodore. Great sailor, sire of 2 world champions. Come on up, Paul Heineken.
Thank you, Ron. My job is simply to welcome everybody to a job that Ron does so well. So we're all here, the rain stopped momentarily, so we can enjoy learning about the lake that's become a desert soon. So lots happening around the club, mostly holiday decorations last weekend and parties into the future. Lots of parties, so come join us. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Commodore. Commodore Paul Heineken. Let's see a little bit about future speakers. Some people have sort of packed it in, got on their boat, and left. And we're going to talk to one such brave individual, John Kirshmer, who is a circumnavigator, and his life now consists of writing about taking people on trips around the world. So he picks up a passenger in Cabo and sails to Mazatlan, picks up another passenger in Mazatlan, sails to, Costa Rica, etc. And in the process of doing this, he's become a really good writer, and he's become an incredibly thoughtful lecturer, and he's become a bit of a philosopher. So he'll come and talk to us about the promise, the challenges, and the freedom of sailing to the edge of time as he sees it. So John Kirshmer will be here in February. February 5th, the winner of the Mallory Cup in 1963, the America's Cup artist in residence, and a 90-year-old birthday boy will be celebrated here in this room when we smile and listen to the wise words of our esteemed great sailor and artist, Jimmy DeWitt, here with us today. Jimmy, those who don't know and don't recognize the Mallory Cup, that's the national championship in sailing. He won that way back in '63. Who was born in '63, or already born in '63? Few of you were already here in '63. Everyone, you've been hearing about the International Ocean Film Festival. The founder of it will be here on February 29 to talk all about their upcoming 19th annual festival. They have very, very thoughtful, curation of movies. We'll get to see the coolest ones that are coming along there. And then on January 15th, we'll have the Ocean Institute cleanup of 2020 and beyond. That is to say, Mary Crowley of the Cruising Club of America and the whole Cruising Club of America will do a joint meeting with the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon here at the Yacht Club when the club reopens on January 15th. And next week, or on December 18th, we'll have the Father-Son Christmas Luncheon. The Father-Son Christmas Luncheon is a great tradition where we'll have shanty singers, we'll have the Sots, the Sons of the Sea, we'll have, in fact, the Grammy Award-winning San Francisco Boys Chorus. They will be back for a repeat appearance. They're really knockout performers. They performed at many White Houses and around the world. And next week, a completely fascinating speaker, John Geohagen. He's the researcher who discovered there really was a Japanese submarine fleet off of the coast of California. In fact, it attacked California on a couple of occasions right after Pearl Harbor. Many people thought this was just a neurotic idea by San Franciscans, and when a submarine net was stretched across the bay, many people thought this was just an extraordinary precautionary action. But in reality, he will prove that there were submarines all up and down, and the Japanese actually intended to have a follow-on invasion of us here in River City. So he wrote a great book, Operation Storm, Japan's top secret submarine plan to win World War II on the coast of California. I searched around to find this guy. He's a really fascinating, very informed and thoughtful speaker. Now a little bit about our speaker today. while we look out these windows, we are not thinking about Oak Ridge, Tennessee, not nearly the Pacific Ocean or San Francisco Bay, or the Manhattan Project, which was spawned partially from his hometown of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where they enriched uranium. And nobody knows this, and I'm not sure it's a fact, but somewhere in the enriching of the uranium, a person was born who had extra powers to kind of see into the natural future of the Earth, and began at age 7 looking into little telescopes at black widows and charging kids 5 cents for a peek. I would have paid. And then he got a telescope, and he got a microscope. He used the microscope for the black widow. Then on the telescope, he would line it up at the moon and charge people 5 cents for a view of the moon through this big telescope. This is the background of the kind of guy who would later in life charge people good money to join him on trips around the world. So he got started real early in this scam, which everybody realizes is anything but, because he's gifted and brilliant, and people pay, I would, and many others, thousands do, on these trips around the world. And he'll take you to Africa, or he'll take you to all kinds of fascinating places, and he's probably best at defining fascinating places because he's a naturalist with his own master's degree and all the rest of that. And I won't count just the thousands of trips or the hundreds of lectures to define him as a great, thoughtful authority. But if you listen to channel, KQED, 88.5 on the radio, he keeps popping up there too. So it's with great pleasure that I bring up recognized authority and naturalist to talk to us all about the fact that Mojave Desert was once a great lake in California. Please welcome Michael Ellis. Yep, thanks. So we'll see.
So I did grow up in a town called the Atomic City around irradiation, but it didn't affect me. It didn't affect me. It didn't affect me. It didn't affect me. Anyway, we're really far from the Mojave Desert right now. 2 years ago, I was scheduled to do this, and my hometown caught on fire. And Ron, bless his heart, was like, well, come on down anyway. We'll feed you lunch. It's like, Ron, you don't understand. There's fire on 3 sides of me right now. I'm not coming down here. So it's been 2 years. So we're delayed, but I'm happy to be here right now. Yeah, so, and I'm not an authority on anything. I know a little bit about a lot of stuff, but not a lot about one particular thing. So I'm a master of nothing. But what we're going to do right now is go over a little bit of the Mojave Desert, which is kind of a interesting juxtaposition with where we are right now. And there will be a quiz. Okay, so let me see. How do I get this? Do I hit a button and then it? I see it here, but I don't.
So, Brett, what's wrong here? So, Eric? It's just up. Did it have it?
Yes. Where's the folder of the
all these.
Yeah, double click that.
Command A. Open them all. That's this stuff. Okay. And then right click yes.
So you want to go back to the beginning?
Yeah, we will. Eric.
One more.
Full screen. It was just a minute ago. What's what? Make it big here. Hold it, everybody.
Well, I'm going to keep drinking my gin and tonic.
Good heavens. So, John, I'm going to restart my computer just on the chance that that fixes it. So, Michael, while we all wait for our computer to get set up here.
Okay, so I can let's guided visualization.
There you go.
Okay, we are in the Bay Area. So at the equator, there's a tremendous amount of solar radiation hitting the belt across the middle. And as that radiation hits, hot air rises. As that hot air rises, the moisture in it condenses out, because as you go 1,000 feet up, the temperature drops 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. It can't hold as much water. So what that creates is a band of rainforest around the whole planet. As that moisture-bearing, soon-to-be lost, wind goes up, it goes up to the north and it goes to the south. It drops down in both latitudes at 30 degrees. When that air comes back down, it is devoid of moisture. It is hot because it's compressed, and it creates a band of deserts around both sides of the Earth at 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south. So we've got the Sonoran Desert. In the northern hemisphere, we've got the Sahara Desert, the biggest desert. We got the Saudi Arabian Desert. We have a desert in India as well. In the southern hemisphere, in Africa, we have the Namibian Desert, the Kalahari Desert. We have the Australian Desert. We have the Atacama Desert, and this is all at 30 degrees north. So there's a band. Are we there yet? Okay.
Here we go.
There we go.
Eureka.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. Thank you. So I don't know if you can. So I don't know if you can see this or not, but you can see these cells. And those of you that are sailors, of course, this is really important to you, because these are also associated with the trade winds and all of that. Oh, there we go. Now, if I hit this button, is it going to? Yes. So now we can see the deserts that are found throughout the world, the ones that I was trying to describe. And if you notice also, there's other kinds of deserts. A desert by definition, and this is arbitrary, human beings just create arbitrary definition so we can talk about it. So the technical definition of a desert is any place on the planet Earth that receives less than 10 inches of precipitation a year. Okay, so that could actually be the Antarctic area. It could be the top of a mountain range. It can be obviously the deserts we've just referenced. And you've noticed the 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south, but also there's some higher deserts. Okay, those deserts are, some of them are rain shadow deserts, where the moisture-bearing clouds can't get in, like the Gobi Desert right in the middle of the continent. It's what we call continental deserts. And then, of course, the southern and the Arctic and the Antarctic tops of mountains. By definition, those are deserts. But more importantly, the total amount of precipitation is the fact that the precipitation can be very irregular. You can go for years in some places without any measurable rain, especially like the Atacama Desert, for example, in southern South America. And one of the characteristics is the presence of a lot of solar radiation, the savage summer sun. And also, you think of the desert as being depauperate. That is, not much growing on it. You know, this is, some of you are probably familiar with Death Valley. This is from Zabriskie Point, which was also the name of one of the worst movies ever made in the early 1970s. I don't recommend it. But actually, and also we think of the sand in deserts. And in actuality, there's only about 15% of any of the deserts that are covered with sand, although that's the image that Hollywood likes. But actually, there can be a lot of plant matter as well. We think of it as deserts as being a place of, well, it's a harsh place for sure to live. But basically, vegetation, plants, and animals are adapted to deserts. So it's only like a polar bear would have a hard time in a desert, all right? But the plants that live there and the animals that live there thrive in this because they've had time to evolve to adapt through change. Another characteristic of deserts is the presence of wind. And this is, I was looking for an example of wind. The only one I could get was from Burning Man, which takes, you can see, this is a Burning Man picture right here. So this is a characteristic of the deserts as well. And so what we have is savage summer sun, often depauperate, not much plant matter, and wind. Those are characteristics. And so precipitation, as I said, is intermittent or non-existent. The Atacama Desert, for example, there's been places where there's been no measurable precipitation in 100 years. Okay, that's pretty amazing. And then there's a phenomenon called virga, V-I-R-G-A, which some of you have probably witnessed, where the moisture tries to get to the ground, but it's evaporated before it gets there. And virga is the Latin word for twig. So that's, you can imagine how frustrating that is for ranchers. But when it does come, it can be catastrophic. So you have lots of flash floods. So you can have changes that occur literally overnight with dramatic consequences. And here's a picture just outside of Death Valley, gives you a sense of and sometimes what the deserts are referred to as fossilized landscapes. So they kind of look the same for a while, and then all of a sudden a massive rain comes and the whole vegetation patterns change. And then there's a phenomenon known as desert varnish. And I picked this rock up to illustrate this. There's little microorganisms, cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, that coat the surface of many rocks in the desert. And they actually take atmospheric manganese and coat the rocks. And so whole mountain ranges will be all black with a coating of manganese on the surface. It's called desert varnish. And underneath, another phenomenon is this iron oxide that's also, so basically exobiologists, those are biologists that are looking at the potential of life forms growing on other planets, look to the desert and extreme environments for evidence of how an organism can survive these really extreme conditions. And looking at, say, desert varnish, for example, and when they sent the rover up to Mars to collect rocks, they're seeing if any of the rocks look like they possibly could have had desert varnish on it. Desert varnish is very slow growing. And so another thing that can happen is you can measure the age of desert sometimes by the amount of desert varnish that's coating the rock. I traveled through the Sahara Desert, and there are whole mountain ranges that are actually black with this desert varnish. Now here in the American West, we have a number of different deserts. And the ones I want to talk about that are pertinent to California is the Sonoran Desert, which you can see in this picture right here, which is characterized by relatively low elevations, brutally hot summers, relatively mild winters, and as I said, low elevation from 0 to 2,000 feet. And the plants that characterize the Sonoran Desert are the columnar cacti. That would be like saguaro cactus or candelabra cactuses. And that occupies a lot of Baja California and the Sonoran province of northern Mexico, and a little bit of California, and a little bit of a lot of New Mexico and Arizona. And most of the precipitation that comes and hits the Sonoran Desert is in the summertime, all the way from the Gulf of Mexico, not the Gulf of California, but the Gulf of Mexico coming across. Now, if you look at this picture, you can see a little bit to the left of, if you look at San Diego, you can see a little dark section right there. That's the part of the Sonoran Desert that's in California, and that's called the Coloradan subset. Unfortunately, we don't have the columnar cactus in that, but that Anza-Borrega Desert State Park you might be familiar with as a characteristic of the Sonoran Desert. Then we're going to skip to the north, and you can see the Great Basin Desert. And that's most of Nevada, and east of the Sierra Nevada, starting, say, at the Owens Valley, and a little bit north Mono Lake. That's the Great Basin Desert, and that's characterized by brutally cold summers, not so hot, brutally cold winters, and not so hot summers, high elevation, 5,000 to 7,000 feet high, and the plant that characterizes that is the sagebrush, the Great Basin sagebrush. Okay, most of Nevada, as you can see, some of Washington, a lot of Oregon, Utah is all this desert. If you've been on Highway 50 going across Nevada, the loneliest highway in America, you just go all the way through that vegetation. Now we come to the desert we're talking about now, which is the Mojave Desert. And you can see in many ways this is a transitional desert. It's a transition between the Sonoran Desert and the Great Basin Desert, characterized by moderate elevations, 4,000 to 7,000 feet. And the plant that characterizes that is the Joshua tree. Summer precipitation and winter precipitation. And go back a little bit, and some of the deserts that you see are above 30 degrees here. That's because they're what we call rain shadow deserts. So here in California, of course, moisture-bearing clouds coming from the Pacific Ocean, hitting the outer coast range, Mount Tamalpais, inner coast range, skipping over the Central Valley, then going up into the Sierra Nevada, and finally trying to a little bit to get over the Sierra Nevada. But by the time they get to those eastern regions, most of the precipitation has been wringed out of them. So right here, some of you might recognize where this is, the town of Mojave, where they keep all those planes, you know, on Highway 58. And so you can see the rain shadow effect of those deserts right there. And here, if you look at this wedge-shaped pie right here, this is basically the Mojave Desert. It's the smallest desert in North America, but by far the biggest desert in California. And it's bounded on the southern side by the San Andreas Fault, which is running sort of from the northwest to the southeast, going right down through the great the Salton Sea, which is that body of water that you see on the lower right-hand side. And then the fault coming down from the north is called the Garlock Fault. And we know that, so basically it's like the, related to the yacht club, it's the prow of a ship plowing into the west there. So that whole area that you're looking at sort of to the right there, except a little bit to the north, is the Mojave Desert. Let's see. And this is a characteristic of the Mojave Desert, is the Joshua tree. Which is a member of the lily family, and it's a tree lily, and it was named by the Mormons as they were coming across. They were, as you know, settled in Salt Lake City, but they had an outpost in San Bernardino, and they were going across the Mojave Desert, and there was it was rough going in the middle of the day, and suddenly there was a cloud that blotted out the sun. So it was, of course, God, shining down on the Mormons as they head west, and there was a supplication of Joshua, which was this trees right here, which they saw. Now, there's some other people that have a different idea of Joshua trees, which I will just read this, if I can put my glasses on. By the way, in the background here is Edwards Air Force Base. This is the Western Mojave. Can you see that little structure in the background right there? It is a weird, menacing object, more like some conception of pose than any work of wholesome Mother Nature. One can scarcely find a term of ugliness that is not apt for this plant. A misshapen pyre with belt and boots and hands and teeth, stuck full of daggers, is as near as I can come to a human analogy. The wood is harsh, rasping fiber, knife-like blades, long, hard, and keen. In the place of leaves, the flower is greenish-white, ill-smelling, and the fruit a cluster of nubbly pods, bitter and useless. A landscape filled with Joshua trees has a nightmare effect even in broad daylight. At the witching hour, it can almost be infernal. Okay, he was having a bad time in the desert that day. And the other characteristics, as we talked about the earthquake, was the presence of volcanic activity. Okay, this is Ubi Crater. Some of you might be familiar with this on the north end of Death Valley. Now here is the reference to the ancient lake. So we talk about ice ages, climate change. The climate's always been changing. The question is about the rapidity and the cause of this recent sort of will-be catastrophic climate change. But for the last 1.8 million years or so, we've had a whole series of what we call ice ages, but a more accurate term would call them pluvial times. Pluvial just means rain. And so the ocean right here, if we were to go back 15,000 years ago, there would be 300 feet lower than it is today. We'd look out here, there'd be a broad river going through this broad river valley that would go between Tiburon and Angel Island, emptying the Great Central Valley of California. Right underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, you've probably seen underwater topography of this, was a gigantic waterfall, a cataract. And then if you were actually get to the Pacific Ocean, it'd be on the other side of the Farallon Islands. Okay, so where'd all that water go? Well, all that water's in all of these inland lakes. And so if you look at this map right here, you can see Mono Lake at the top. You can see a number of lakes, Sears Lakes, Owens Lake, which no longer exists. And the whole area all eventually, at the peak, would have flown into Death Valley, which is the lowest part in the Western Hemisphere, 282 feet below sea level. So what has happened through time is when these ice ages, during the pluvial times, all these huge lakes fill up. The biggest one would be what we call Lake Bonneville, or the Great Salt Lake. That was huge lake. And then it shrinks, then it grows, and then it shrinks. And every time it's shrinking, it's concentrating the salts that have accumulated in the water running off from all of the surrounding mountains. And so it's like the bottom of your teapot, basically. All that debris that forms are salts, mostly. And so what's left are these great salt lakes, if you will. Yeah, you can see the one in Death Valley is called Lake Manly. So all these lakes usually have two different names. Mono Lake, the Pleistocene era lake, would be called Lake Russell. The Great Salt Lake, its Pleistocene name would be Lake Bonneville. And Lake Manly is the one for Death Valley. So that's important change. So here's looking down at Death Valley right here. So this is one of those great big salt lakes. Now Ron always tries to orient. I've done a number of talks here. You know, one was on Bhutan. Okay, so boy, he had a hard time going, why are we talking about Bhutan at the St. Francis Yacht Club? But I got this particular slide just for you, Ron. I called my friend down in Shoshone, California, and I said, you got to go out there and you got to take a picture of that Lake Tacoma Yacht Club sign. Because of Ron, I'm talking at the St. Francis Yacht Club, so we need a... Anyway, so this is one of those ancestral lakes that just dried up about 2 million years ago. So this is one of those highway signs, you know, taking care of it. So here you go, Ron. This is for you. Okay. But in the desert, you know, wherever there's water, there's life. I mean, that's the essence. You know, as Ron said, I'm from Tennessee, so it's odd that I find this connection with the desert, you know. But the nice thing, growing up in the eastern United States, probably a lot of you did, like if you wanted to go for a walk, there's like all this green stuff in the way. There's trees, there's bushes, you know, it gets in the way. You need a trail or something. You go in the desert, it's like, I want to go to that mountain over there. Nothing's stopping you. You know, you can just go there, you know. So there's this scale, which I love, which is this macro scale, you know, where you can easily see 150 miles away. And then you look down and there's little bitty annual flowers about that big growing. So there's just this, you know, and if I want to go somewhere, nothing's stopping me but my own energy. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, there we are. Okay. So here's a little ribbon of green. This is a place that I go. And there's even water. And wherever water shows up in the desert is the presence of wildlife. This is the Amargosa River, which is, believe it or not, considered a wild and scenic river. It gives it certain designation and stuff. But there's a waterfall in the desert, you know, which is super cool, which I like. And this is a plant that grows here, mesquite. You probably heard of mesquite. Mesquite is a plant that, there's a couple of ways that plants adapt to desert environments. One is what we call phragophytes, which means well plant. This plant can send its roots down over 105 feet to tap into permanent water. So if you were a pioneer coming across and you saw mesquite growing luxuriously, you'd know that somewhere down there's some water, okay, which would be a good place for you to hang out. The Native Americans depended on, this is kind of the equivalent of the oak tree for these Indians here in terms of the plant carbohydrates that they got to survive. It was the mesquite. So some of the Indians used to call their year in reference to where the mesquite was in its flowering and fruiting sequence. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the human beings that were in the Mojave Desert. This is a scene along the Colorado River, and the word Mojave means by the waters, essentially. So that's the name these people had for themselves. And they're a part of the linguistic group called the human people. They were very aggressive people. They were cultivators. They weren't hunter-gatherers, but the word Mojave was their name for themselves, and so that's where the name for the desert comes from, essentially. And they were adapted to the desert. They would go. They had what we call a vertical migration. So when it was, you know, hot in the summertime, they'd just go up in high elevation, and then it was in the wintertime they'd come down to lower elevation. They adapted to whatever the desert had to offer. And survived quite well until the Europeans showed up with diseases. Now, this is an odd picture, but if you look, these are what is called Indian sleeping circles. Nobody knows who made these. They just know that Native Americans made these somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 years ago. Made what? If you look in the middle of the picture here, you see these cleared areas where the stones have been removed. Those are 5,000 to 8,000 years old, those things. Nobody knows who. The word Anasazi, which you probably heard before, just means the ancient ones, okay? So the Paiute Indians, the Shoshone Indians, the Indians that live in this area right now had no idea who made these, but they were the people that came before them. But they were definitely anthropogenic. They were made by human beings. Nobody knows what they're for. It could be as simple as like, I hate sleeping on rocks. You know, I mean, everybody likes to imbue these things with some kind of religious significance, but maybe it was something as simple as, who wants to sleep on rocks? Let's move those rocks out of the way and we'll sleep in little circles. I mean, who knows? Or maybe there's something very, you know, important about them. Who knows? But whatever it is speculation on our part, because whoever made these are long gone. So if you notice here, desert springs attract a plethora of wildlife. You get it? You want me to say this again? No. I had everybody pose like desert springs. There's a wildlife concentration. Anyway, so yeah. And I love catching things. This is, you can see this is a little scorpion right here. As long as you don't, you know, bother them, they won't bother you. So I carefully pick them up. It impresses like 10-year-old boys for sure, or girls too, for that matter. Yeah, that's a close-up look of that one right there. Yeah, scorpions are arachnids. They're related to spiders and mites, ticks. And the bigger the pinchers, this is a general rule of thumb. The bigger the pinchers, the less likely they are really poisonous. Okay, if they have little tiny pinchers, then they're using their poison. So that's you know. But most of there's only one scorpion really in North America that will kill you if you're a young person or an old person. That's the bark scorpion, which is found in Arizona and northern New Mexico. Northern Mexico. This one I can pick up, and as long as you don't kind of hold it and, you know, it impresses people, which I always like to do. And then I also like to catch things. Again, I went fishing. Oh, fishing! And I use a telescoping fishing rod with dental floss. And you just kind of reach over and you get around their necks and you can pull them up like this, and it doesn't hurt them. And this is a chuckawalla, which is the biggest lizard that we have in the Mojave Desert. There's Gila monsters too, but they're very rare. Anyway, that's a chuckawalla, which tastes like, yes, exactly right. They apparently actually do taste like chicken, like iguanas. These are vegetarians, the big lizards. Here's one picking out from a rock right here. This is a desert iguana. Right here, these guys are the second biggest one. It can be about that big, something like that. These guys, these guys are exclusively vegetarians. They'll climb up. They remind me of Ferdinand the Bull. You know, you know, remember that children's story with the bull? You know, he didn't really want to fight. You know, and he's under the cork oak tree, and there's little, you know, corks hanging from the oak tree. Anyway, I've seen these guys climbing up creosote bushes in the middle of the day, eating the flowers. You know, so you see this big lizard, and he's eating flowers. And this is, and these guys can tolerate the highest temperatures and be out in 115-degree temperature without overheating. They're called desert iguanas. Nice guy. And this is the side blotched lizard. This is the commonest one right here. If you look right by my thumb there, you can see a little purple blotch on the side. That's where the name comes from. These lizards get into the Great Central Valley of California as well, and can get out under the lowest temperatures. They get active really early. Little guys, only about that big. And this is the horned lizard, or sometimes horny toad, you know, which is a misnomer because they're not toads. That's amphibian. This is a lizard, and they are famicivores. What does a famicivore eat? Yes, ants. Anteaters. Formica is the Latin word for ants, not like the table. Okay. So they're anteaters, actually, and they have a thing that no other animal does. Now, I've never seen this. This is a picture I took of a picture. But when a canid dog or coyote or fox or kit fox bothers this guy, they do something quite phenomenal, which is blood squirts out of their eyeballs. Can you see that picture right there? I mean, wouldn't that freak you out? I'm not eating this guy. So this is a picture. The lizard's down at the very bottom of the screen. The photographer captured blood squirting out of this guy's eye. Now, if you're messing with the cat, it won't do it with the cat. It won't do it with the bobcat. It won't do it with a mountain lion. It won't do it with a human being. It has to be a dog. For some reason, they've evolved this mechanism for freaking dogs out, so they won't eat them, which would be, of course, naturally occurring would be a fox or a coyote in the desert. Anyway, that's one of the most bizarre things I've ever not seen. And I also like to catch snakes. This is a big gopher snake, actually. They get really large in the desert. I like to catch them. And my rule is catch one, look at it, never catch another one on that trip. You know, I don't like to bother things. This is a red racer or a coach whip. These guys are very aggressive. They're not poisonous, but when they bite you, they pull and they lacerate. So I was with a bunch of naturalists, and we were talking about what's the stupidest thing you ever did as a naturalist. So there was a friend of mine that was a naturalist in the Colorado River, and he caught one of these. It bit him on the thumb badly, but he did get it. So he's got this snake, and he's showing everybody. And then he sees the blood on his thumb. So he goes like this to lick the thumb, and the snake bites him right on the nose. So he won. And, you know, and of course there's rattlesnakes as well. Okay, now this is a picture. It's hard to see from the scale, but this guy is only about that big. This is a sidewinder, okay, or horned rattlesnake. Rattlesnakes have developed this, like a lot of snakes, highly modified saliva, which we know is venom. And basically, it's digestive juices that have evolved through time. Hypodermic needles, they bite their prey, inject a certain amount of venom, back off, and just wait for the animal to pass, and then eat the animal. Okay. Now, some people, oh God, it's rattlesnakes, but hey, they make noise. You go to Australia or Africa, there's a lot of poisonous snakes. They don't make noise. This guy at least lets you know as a warning. The speculation is that this was an adaptation against big hooved animals, i.e. bison and buffalo. So let the buffalo know do not tread on me. That great American poster. What state is that? Connecticut? No, what is it? New Hampshire, isn't it? Don't tread on me. Yeah, with the big snake. Anyway, but the thing about the Mojave Desert, which is why I really stopped taking my little boy to it years ago in one particular place, is they have the Mojave green rattlesnake, which is the most dangerous rattlesnake in North America. The reason is because it has both a hemotoxin and a neurotoxin. So hemotoxins would be the ones that kind of start digesting your body right away and leave holes in you. And neurotoxin would affect the central nervous system. This snake has both of those, the Mojave green rattlesnake. But, you know, I tell people on my trips, you know, the rattlesnake bites the seventh person in line. So just be shifting for position as we're walking along. And then, of course, this is the California state reptile, which is the desert tortoise. And this is the greatest populations of these are in the Mojave Desert, actually. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I think but also there's birds. And this is the Anna's hummingbird, exactly the same species that is found all around here. Oh, that picture didn't come out very well. That's a raven right there. And of course, this one is the classic one. And they actually are, they don't go beep beep, but they are quite common. And this one, the story of this one is actually, I was at my friend's house, and this is a male roadrunner, which has been hanging around at his house for a while, and there's no other females. There's no other roadrunners. There's no females. And he's been catching lizards, and there was a little rabbit in the back of his yard. We were sitting there just having coffee one morning. We looked out, and there's the roadrunner. He's got this big lizard, and there's a little bunny rabbit there. And so he goes up to present the lizard to this rabbit, and the rabbit's like, whoa, dude, no, I don't go there. And no, he was courting this rabbit, and they're trying to do food presentation, not only to a different, you know, like a mammal with fur, but a male and also a vegetarian. So it wasn't getting very far. But I was so happy that there was actually somebody that actually witnessed this with me, because we're looking at each other. Do you see what we just saw? You know, it was hilarious. And oh, here's the rabbit. Okay, this one's like, no, I don't think so. And little rodents. I'm just gonna. And this is, of course, the kind of quintessential. And now, of course, we're seeing these everywhere. Coyotes. Coyote. That's how you say it. It's that language that they speak in Mexico City. I can't remember the name of Nahuatl or something like that. Anyway, that's the most flexible, adaptable canid. This is the one that if it tried to bite one of those, you know, what do you call them, the horned lizard, that the blood would squirt out. But these guys are vegetarians, are omnivorous, they're desert adapted. And if you see a coyote in the desert, it's going to be smaller than the ones that you see up in the mountains, because they have a deal of genetic plasticity. So desert's a harsher environment, so they tend to be a little bit smaller in the desert. But now we get to the plants. This is the Choya. Okay, you've probably seen these a lot. And one of my favorite quotes is from this guy, UC Berkeley guy, about the Choya. And Choya is the Mexican term for this plant. And this is what he has to say about the Choya. The vegetable kingdom has not produced anything else so fearfully armed. But in the desert, one thing is worse than any pain in the flesh. It is thirst. I have seen emaciated, dreadfully dehydrated cattle, deprived of water for months in the blistering heat, so mad from thirst that they eat the terrible Choya. They munch these, this is my favorite part, awful morsels of moisture until their lips are pinned together with the spines and their throats are a veritable pincushion. The spines eventually cause their death. So I mentioned the whale plant, the mesquite. that taps into permanent water. And then you have the succulents that survive in the desert by just being super tough. These send roots out at the surface and also down deep. And the cactus are, this one's called cotton top. Cactus, the Cactaceae family, are only found in the New World. Okay, that's only North, Central, and South America. Okay, they can all be all the way down in Argentina and even in Canada has, but they are not found anywhere else. So if you see a cactus growing in North Africa, for example, that's an introduced cactus, probably the opuntia, the prickly pear that, you know, Luther Burbank evolved to have no spines, that one. Anybody been to Madagascar? Okay, nobody. Anyway, there's one genus of cactus in Madagascar that is confounding to the botanist, but other than that, they're found. If you see something that looks like a cactus in the Old World, it's a euphorbia. Okay, but they're only found in the New World. And they get to be some of the, oh, dragon fruit. You know the dragon fruit that you get in the tropics? That's a cactus. When you eat those, all those little seeds, that's a cactus. And they're almost all the fruits are edible. There's just not a lot of them. That's a beaver tail. This is Mojave Mound cactus. They're quite pretty. And this is another succulent. This is related to the Joshua tree. This is another tree lily. This is called the Mojave yucca, this particular one. And it's kind of characteristic of the Mojave Desert where we are. And then there is the creosote bush. And this is the one that all of you flying across from the east over the deserts of California have looked down and seen. Looks like somebody's planted these in perfect rows in the desert. And it's called the creosote bush. Here's the flower right here. There are 100 and, what's the number? Well, you know, 48.9% of all statistics are made up on the spot, which I'm about to do right now. 93 million acres of California is covered in creosote bush. It is the most common shrub in North America. Okay, creosote is the Latin word that means flesh preserving. So the creosote logs that you see was a petroleum product made by German chemists to preserve logs. Has the same name, but not that it's totally unrelated, the creosote bush. So the creosote, but now here's the amazing thing. Okay, here's a, they do, okay, the most amazing thing about creosote bushes. In Patagonia, if any of you have been down to Punta Tumba, where the Magellanic penguins breed, they're breeding under creosote bushes. Talk about incongruous. You have this penguin that's underneath the creosote bush. Botanists believe that the American golden plover brought the creosote seeds all the way from South America to northern Mexico at the end of the last ice age. As the climate got drier and drier and hotter, this plant was pre-adapted to living in these conditions and just moved north until it's one of the most successful plants on the planet Earth is the creosote bush. At the test site in Nevada, 20 creosote bushes at ground zero. Nuclear explosion, 19 came back. Okay, I want those guys on my team. Now, the reason I have put this picture in right here is the Nature Conservancy purchased this bit of land. This is called the King Clone. If you look, there's a circle. Okay, you can see a circle of these creosote bushes. If you were to extrapolate back and go out into the very middle of this circle, that plant, that ancient creosote plant, was growing, I'm not making this up, 11,700 years ago, essentially at the end of the last ice age. In some ways, this is the oldest living thing on the planet Earth, although unlike the bristlecone pines up in the White Mountains, you can't go and put your arm around something, right? Because it's the ancestral one, the ancient one is dead, but every single one of those in the circle is genetically identical. So they all came from this plant that basically germinated at the end of the last ice age over 11,000 years ago. It's pretty amazing, okay? And then every once in a while, there's one of the super blooms, okay? Super blooms, a bunch of things have to happen just right for super blooms to happen. The winter precipitation has to be coupled. Well, anyway, let's back up a little bit. The seeds, so they don't get quote unquote fooled in the summertime. Let's say there's a summer thunderstorm where you really don't want to germinate in the summertime in Death Valley, okay, or the Mojave Desert. I have a friend, that same friend that we witnessed this thing with. He lives right outside of Death Valley, and he told me years ago, he calls me Mike. He goes, Mike, it gets so hot here, nothing is funny. And so that is not when I go to the Mojave Desert. I'm a fair weather desert grower. I go in April or March or April, something like that. At any rate, the seeds have something called germination inhibitors, chemicals in the seeds that prevent them from germinating, except if they've been washed a number of times. So that prevents them from flowering in July in this thunderstorm. So every once in a while, the conditions are just right for what we call a super bloom. By the way, the seeds can wait for years. I don't know if you remember, but in one of the tombs in Egypt, they pulled some seeds out that were not tens of thousands, but 3,000 or 4,000 years old. They germinated. So one of the other strategies of adapting to the desert is to just wait until conditions are perfect and then germinate. And when they do, that's really spectacular. It just is, and this is a desert 5 spot. I'm just having pretty little pictures here. How am I doing? Hold on. Oh, shoot. Okay. So here we are in the desert. I never showed this to my insurance underwriter. Or climbing up little hills. Or cooking in the desert. This is what I do for a living. So this is, if I'll keep doing this trip to the Mojave and to Africa, to Tanzania and to Brazil as long as I can walk around. So this is one of my favorite places, which is nice. And then here's Water Basin. As I said, the lowest part in the Western Hemisphere, 282 feet, I believe it says. And those of you that have heard me talk before know that I really like hula hooping. So I bring all the hula hoops. If you look in the background, you can see people carrying hula hoops. And we hula hoop at the lowest part in the Western Hemisphere. I bring a little boom box out there. We crank the music up, and we all hula hoop. And, people go, what are you doing? And we're hula hooping at the lowest part in the Western Hemisphere. Well, what do you think? Anyway, a little closure here. To those who come to the desert with tolerance, it gives friendliness. To those who come with courage, it gives new strength of character. Those seeking relaxation find a release from the world of man-made tensions. For those seeking beauty, the desert offers its nature's rarest artistry. That's totally true. As I mentioned earlier, there's a number of different ways to look at the desert. You don't have to, but what the desert isn't is impoverished. Okay, and it's like a lot of things. You kind of what the viewer brings to it is what you get out. I mean, it's kind of like life, right? You bring to it, and then you receive its bounty, shall we say? And so that must be the last pretty picture. Yay! Forever. So can I sit there?
Welcome again to our Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Our speaker today, Michael Ellis, a naturalist and incredible, he will say not authority, I will say authority. I get to choose on this matter, on pretty much all things nature. How hot does it get in the Mojave Desert, Michael?
Well, I don't know if you've kept up with these records, but there was a report that Death Valley was the second hottest place on the planet Earth, and in the Libyan desert, there was one place that got hotter. And within the last 5 years or so, they realized that record in the Libyan desert was incorrect. That it was, they've said no, that's not true. So now the hottest place in the world, the recorded temperature was 134 degrees in July 1920 in Death Valley. And Death Valley has that record. It also receives 1.54 inches of rainfall a year or something like that. But not more important, but in addition to that, there's no moisture in the air. So what that means is the difference between day and night temperature can be radical. It can be as much as 50 to 60 degrees, in one 24-hour period. So not only in the daytime, it could be super, super hot, and then at night, so it could, it's all over the map.
Why is it so hot? What makes it so hot?
The solar radiation, the lack of plant cover, no evaporation, that it's low, and so that air that's coming down, as I mentioned earlier, is super compressed. And as you compress anything, you put the molecules closer together, it heats it up. And so that's the reason the Mojave is in particular quite hot. The Sonoran Desert is hot as well. But as I mentioned, the Mojave Desert is relatively high elevation, but Death Valley is kind of the exception within it because it's this dropped valley called a Graben. It's the German word that means ditch. And so those of you that have traveled across the east of the Sierra Nevada, Owens Valley or Mono Lake, it's a geologic province called the Basin and Range Province, where the earth has stretched a little bit. And so what you have is these mountains that pop up like this and valleys that drop down like this. So they're internal drainages. That's why they're the water, you know, in the eastern United States, for example, when you have a river or a stream, it flows into a larger river or stream, which flows into the Mississippi, which flows into it all goes downhill. That's because the geology is different. But here in the American West, you've got these dropped valleys due to the stretching and thinning of the Earth's crust, and there's no outfall. And so that's called the Basin and Range Province.
Now, I'm going to keep asking questions, but hold the mic up for a little bit. Our moderator is going to walk around, our microphone user will bring the mic to you so we can basically listen to your questions as well. So how cold does it get in the Mojave?
There's lots of pictures of snow on Joshua trees, and so it can get brutally cold at the high elevations, of course, higher. So it can be down in the 20s regularly, and precipitation, as I said, in the wintertime comes as snow in many of the places. And it can be, that's why I go in March and April. I'm a fair weather desert person. I don't go in the wintertime, and I'm kind of Goldilocks. You know, I mean, in life, I'm kind of Goldilocks. You know, I kind of like it just right.
So now, give us a day in the life of a Mojave trip with you. What time do you have everybody get up? How big are the trips? How many people are on them? And
usually 16 people. It's camping.
1-6.
16.
1-6. Okay.
Yeah. And you know, usually it's camping, although there are a few bed and breakfasts nearby if somebody wants to do that. You know, get up in the morning and, you know, make coffee and have breakfast, and then we get out on.
What time do you get up in the morning?
Oh, you know, 6:30, something like that. You know, but we don't really get going until 8 or 8:30, something like that. So then we, you know, it depends on the day's activities, but we go slowly because we're looking and learning and walking, and we'll either go on a hike right from my camp. And by the way, I have a private camp that I use in the Mojave Desert. That friend, the same friend that I'm referencing, owns a date farm called China Ranch Date Farm right outside. It's about 85 miles from Las Vegas, which is kind of funny because
dates, being what they are.
Well, and also there's China Ranch, and so over the border in Nevada, there's other kinds of ranches. You know, so every once in a while, some guy shows up and goes, "I'd like a date." Well, like that big, that kind of, which is kind of amusing in a way. And then we'll go out bird watching, maybe, you know, in plants and look tracking. I'll catch the lizards, the scorpions, whatever we find, you know. And we're not moving very fast. The idea is to learn and to walk and to enjoy, and you know. And then middle of the day, if it's super hot, we'll take it easy and get going. And then also, what I didn't put in the slideshows is I know a bunch of eccentric people that live there as well. You know, I mean, I don't know if you remember the movie Baghdad Cafe years ago, but anyway, there's a bunch of quirky people, crazy people. I mean, whatever word you want to use, if they're, you know, eccentric if they have money, crazy if they don't. That's what I've noticed. Anyway, so there is actually a cultural aspect to the trip. So we visit some people that are quite like interesting denizens of the desert, you know. Anyway.
Question?
Yes, just a quick question, Mike,
Sure.
and that is through your travels within the Mojave Desert, have you come across any archaeological digs or sites that may have sparked your interest?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I said, there were human beings living in this desert region ever since there's been humans in, you know, the New World. And there's petroglyphs and pictographs as well in the desert. And then you have areas where especially near water courses and places where the mesquite trees, where you have evidence that human beings have been there for a while. And I don't know if there's of any active digs in the Mojave Desert per se, but I got to say this: in the China Lake Navy weapons area, I'm not saying that quite right, but it's outside of Lancaster, is the largest collection of Indian rock art in both the North, Central, and South America. And it's protected within the U.S. military. So it's protected in a way that it would not have been protected otherwise. And you can only get into it by special permission. And that one's fantastic. I've never been in there. I've just read about it. But it's supposed to be spectacular. That's a good question.
Is the Mojave getting hotter?
Well,
What's your own experience?
Yeah, my own experiences when it does, nothing's funny. So, yeah, so I don't
year
go
to year to year,
But
decade to decade.
No, I know what you're asking. You know, people ask me that question all the time about my travels, and what you have to. I'm not a scientist, and what you have to know is you have to really get good data, and whatever I said would be anecdotal. It would be like, oh, that little snapshot. Oh, last year was hotter than this year, but that's not accurate. What you need is good science that somebody's doing that's actually measuring ambient temperature and seeing. What we are seeing are delays in some of the bird migrations, or they're showing up earlier than they used to. There's things like that that people are tracking, but I haven't noticed per se that it's getting hotter.
Are coyotes the biggest mammal? What is the biggest mammal?
Well, that's a good question. There's mule deer, which is related to our black-tailed deer here, and there's bighorn sheep.
Really?
Yeah, there's bighorn sheep there as well. They're very hard to see, but they definitely exist, and those weigh more than. And there's mountain lions as well. You know, where there's a mule deer, there's bighorn sheep. So I'd have to say the coyotes are the most ubiquitous and successful of the predators. But there are mountain lions that would be found in higher elevations wherever you can find the mule deer, and then there's bighorn sheep as well.
So in Mill Valley, we're noticing more coyotes.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know why. You have any explanation?
Yeah, they're just they've been spreading. They're successful. They're adaptable to human beings. You know, they're amazingly plastic animals. They have social structures that vary depending on where they happen to be. They behave differently when they're in an isolated group out in the Point Reyes or in the Montana than they do in urban areas in Los Angeles. So they're just really super adaptable. So it's not your imagination, by the way. They are, and even some have crossed the Golden Gate Bridge.
Really?
Yeah, didn't even pay a toll.
So now, are they growing as a population down
Yes.
there? Are mammals growing as a population in Mojave?
Oh, I wouldn't say
What do you
that.
think?
No.
Okay.
No.
So, how many perspectives have you done on KQED radio?
Oh, yeah, I do these little 2-minute opinion pieces, and I started in 1989 doing them. So I'm one of the last remaining of that era. If you go back and look at who was working there then, I'm like the old guy there. Of course, I don't have to go into the studio. I do it in my closet in Santa Rosa, and I just kind of record these 2-minute opinion pieces that come once a month. It used to be when I first started, it was every week. Then they're once a month. So
you do it basically once a month.
once a month now.
And they air how many times when you do one?
Oh, they usually replay. They play like 3 times a day, and then they usually replay mine on the weekends and stuff. And you can actually just there's a brochure that it's at the tables here, so you can just click on if you're interested in hearing me more. I don't know why you would be, but you can just click my name, Michael Ellis, KQED Perspectives, and they'll all show up.
So now you mentioned that Mojave was once a lake, but you also mentioned that the Bonneville Lake was a very large lake. How big was it compared, for instance, to the Great Lakes in the Midwest?
Oh, compared to the Great Lakes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
well,
the Bonneville Desert turning into a lake. How big was
Yeah. Well, you'd have to look at a map to see, but a lot of the central part of Utah was this gigantic lake. But all these basins, all these dropped valleys that I was referencing earlier, have these Pleistocene era lakes. And the Mono Lake had a big one. Owens Lake, which no longer exists, had a big one. Searles, Vitrona had a big one. Owens, Panamint Lake had a big one. Death Valley's lake was over 100 miles long, and at the peak was 50 miles wide. I mean, it was gigantic. In the middle of Utah, that lake was gigantic. I mean, I don't know how big, but huge.
I've noticed a decrease in birds in Marin County. Is there a decrease in birds in Mojave?
Yes. There's, unfortunately, I don't know if you saw the National Audubon Society published some data. I guess last month it got a lot of play. There's half the number of birds in North America that there were in 1970. So that's really sad. I mean, the only kind of beneficial thing, it looks like by the age of this group, you guys have great-grandchildren and, grandchildren and great-grandchildren probably. I guess in some way the benefit is when you're born into something, that's your default setting for what it is. So they're not feeling the pain of loss that we are. So when you get born, you say, oh yeah, this is what the world looks like. I mean, that minor compensation for loss of species, but at least the children aren't feeling the pain of that loss that we may be feeling at our age.
So what are the downstream consequences of fewer birds to the ecosystem?
That's a good question, and outside of my purvey. So, like, Remember, I'm not an expert on anything. Yeah, right. I'd leave that one to the experts.
But tell us just from your own anecdotal experience, what depends on birds out in nature, where in the environments where you go?
Okay. All right, I'll give you an example. Okay, so a lot of you have been to the Sierra Nevada, and you might know this bird called the Clark's nutcracker, which is related to jays and crows and ravens and things. And this camp robber is also named. It's a big black, gray and black bird. You see them, you know, around human beings a lot. And they hide seeds. You've probably seen in your yard all the jays hiding, caching seeds, right? I mean, they just, you know, all of a sudden, where'd that oak tree come from? Well, the jays in your yard are bearing acorns everywhere. Well, in the higher elevations, these nutcrackers, they take the seeds of pine trees and fly up and bury them. Okay, and if they didn't do that, all of those seeds would roll downhill. They're flying up and planting them. So if those birds disappeared, essentially those high elevation conifers that are depending on these birds would disappear. So I'm just giving you one example right now. And I assume that John Muir said once, you know, once you try to find some little thing and tug onto it, you find it's connected to everything else. You know, and so there may be ways in which we don't even understand what the role of those birds are until they're removed from the ecosystem.
So have you noticed an increase in insects, or any
a decrease? The whole world is getting impoverished in terms of wildlife. You know, you used to, like when you guys were youngsters and you'd be driving your car down somewhere, the windshield would be full of squished bugs, you know.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, you're lucky to find 2 or 3 bugs. And insects are essential to the ecosystem. I mean, maybe that's one reason why the birds are disappearing. There's not as many, you know, insects to eat.
Jimmy DeWitt has a question.
Oh, 90 years old? Dang.
In February 10, what date? What date? February 13. Mike close.
If a wild turkey,
Mike close.
Put it down a little bit. There you go.
If a wild turkey is a bird, I had never seen one all my life until about 5 or 10 years ago. And now they're all over. They threaten me on the road. They dare me to get on their road. So there's a lot of wild turkey around.
Those turkeys were brought in, but 2 different. The California Department of Fish and Game actually brought this as a subspecies of turkey called the Miriam subspecies, which is found in Texas, and they introduced them into California as a game bird. And they've done extremely well. And so, yes, they're showing up in places we never saw turkeys before. And the coyotes, the bobcats, the other animals that have the potential of eating them aren't keeping up. There's also impacting our native California quail. And they're also eating lots of little vertebrates like lizards and salamanders and snakes and stuff. So the ecological impact is not clear yet, but it's probably not positive, including scaring this poor gentleman.
Another Jim question.
A little west of Lone Pine, there's amazing rock formations. Are you familiar with that?
The Alabama Hills?
Yeah, they have filmed hundreds of Western movies there.
That's the Alabama Hills. It is an amazing rock formation. And being from the South, when I first saw those, I went, how come these are called the Alabama Hills? There ain't nothing like this in Alabama. I happen to know. And so I did a little research on these Alabama Hills. And during the Civil War, there was a great deal of Confederate sympathizers throughout California. Okay, and one of the high passes in the Sierra was called the Kearsarge Pass. Okay, which was one of the ironclad Yankee boats during the Civil War. The Confederate sympathizers said, "Oh yeah, we're going to name these hills after the ironclad Confederate ship named the CSS Alabama." So that's where the name came from, Confederate sympathizers. And yes, it's the classic Western scene. It's almost like that place in the Four Corners, Monument Valley, where you have all those things. But it's a lot more convenient to Los Angeles, where all the movies were being made. So this is beautiful rock formation. I know exactly what you're talking about, called the Alabama Hills. It's granite. And so they're kind of exfoliated granite, and so it was sort of this part of the same Sierra Nevada underpinning, essentially, and uplifted later to erosional forces. Yes, sir.
The mic there.
Michael, I've been reading about the growth of deserts around the world, like the Gobi, and they're trying to stop the desertification, but they can't seem to do it. Could you comment on that?
Well, I'm more familiar with the sub-Saharan desertification, which is in Africa, where I do lots of trips or have done lots of trips. And so what's happening there is that you have human beings that are living at the margin of where humans can live. I mean, I have nothing but empathy and sympathy and compassion for these people trying to eke out an existence in these marginal places in terms of you know, water resources. And one of the things they're doing is the grazing animals are being able to graze all the vegetation down to nothing, the goats especially, sheep as well, but mostly goats and some cows. And so basically what it's allowing is once the, I love this, years ago I read that grass is what knits the soil to the earth. Okay, so I love that image of the soil being knitted to the earth. And once you remove the grass, gosh, guess what happens to the soil? I mean, it's a classic dust bowl thing that happened in this country. And so what's happening in the, I don't know about the Gobi Desert, but in sub-Saharan Africa is because of the grazing animals, it's increasing the desertification. And the plants themselves, if they're allowed to flourish, add to the meteorological environment. You know, I mean, if you remove the plants, then, you know, it gets hotter, it gets drier, the wind starts blowing, and so it just keeps going. But these people are living in super marginal places, you know, so I have nothing but compassion. I mean, when I you know, I travel enough to come back and go, Jesus, am I lucky I was born into this body, into this time, into this thing? I mean, you know, I don't take that for granted, you know, in any of this stuff. So I don't know about the Gobi Desert, but I know about Africa. What are your reading habits? What do you read? What websites? I'm in a book, right? I read The Overstory. I don't know if you read that. It was so depressing. I almost couldn't get through that book. The Overstory? Overstory. It's about, you know, basically it's a novel, but he won the Pulitzer Prize, I think, last year for this book. Anyway, it's about trees. But right now I'm reading a book called Sapien, which is written by this Israeli guy. And he's very entertaining and it's written well. It's about the evolution of human beings and what we're doing on the planet. It's really interesting and it's fun to read. So it's called Sapiens. I highly recommend it. Sapien means wise, maybe a misnomer. I'm not sure. But, it's about the evolution of humans essentially, and all the way from our ancestors 5 million years ago, all the way up to the present, and what we're doing right now, and why we're so we're amazing creatures. I mean, we're so amazing. I mean, every time I get on a plane, I go, "How's this whole thing work?" You know, I go get on a plane, you know, and it goes and lands someplace, and somebody waiting for me takes me. It's like, God, are we something else? So when you want to read more about the Mojave, learn about it, where do you go to learn about it? Are there any sites? Yeah. I mean, there's lots of books that have been written about the Mojave Desert. You know, it depends on what your interest is. You know, there's a great University of California. Their books, you know, they have a lot of books about the natural history of California in different ways. And so any of those UC Press books are really good. And then there's lots of popular accounts now. It depends on what your interest is. If you're looking at sort of the archaeological sites, or you're looking at the human use of it right now, or you're looking at plants and animals, especially plants, the flora, you know, so each one of those places, you know, you have nowadays good resources that you can find out a lot of information. So the best thing is to go there, though, you know, so that you can have a somatic or visceral experience of the place. So give me a media day in the life of Michael Ellis. Do you go to movies still? What's your, and do you look at particular websites to learn about Africa or anywhere else? What are the sites that you look at? What are your inputs? I like to watch The Office. I'm interested. Yeah. You watch television? I have to sometimes, just to like not think about things. Yeah. Well, yeah. I read the New Yorker. I read the Atlantic magazine. You know, I read National Geographic. I read Natural History magazine. I read popular accounts. I Facebook, and people are sending me stuff. You know. What's your Facebook time every day? Probably too much. How much is too much? Probably about an hour and a half, something. When was the Golden Gate? When was there a waterfall on the Golden Gate Bridge? Well, that would have been during the last ice age, so that would have been about 12 or 13,000 years ago. And there's a great USGS map. I don't know if you've seen it. That'd be a great thing to have here. And it shows that, you know, from Raccoon Strait there was an elevation drop of probably 200 or 300 feet, you know, from this ancestral river that was flowing here.
Right.
And then underneath the Golden Gate Bridge was a pretty significant, it was more like cataracts. It wasn't like one big waterfall. It was like this. And you can look at the USGS service has a wonderful picture that you can see underneath. Well, it's not exactly underneath the bridge, but pretty close, of this waterfall. And then all the way out to the Farallon Islands, which would have been, you know, hooked to the mainland at the time, would have been an island. And then about 5 miles west of the islands is where you actually dropped into the Pacific Ocean at that time. So.
Well, Michael Ellis, our guest at the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, it's been, as usual, fascinating speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us. And with that, the luncheon is adjourned. Thank you, Michael. Oh, my God.